In a world where over 41% of the Earth's surface is already desert, and another 40% is at risk of becoming one, survival itself has become a race against the sand. Nowhere was that battle more desperate than in northern China's Kubuqi Desert, a 7,000-square-mile wasteland that once swallowed villages and silenced entire communities. But what seemed irreversible began to change. Through a bold national effort, over 300 million willow trees were planted, 4.5 million rabbits released, and 196,000 solar panels installed, turning desolation into one of the planet's greatest environmental comebacks. The desert that swallowed everything. Imagine flying over a sea of gold, endless dunes stretching as far as the eye can see. The wind howls across the emptiness, sculpting waves of sand that shift and move like a living ocean. But this isn't the Sahara. This is northern China. And beneath those dunes lie the bones of villages, roads, and dreams that once were. Nature, it gives life, shapes civilizations, and sustains everything we know. Yet, it can also take it all back. Across the planet, deserts are expanding faster than forests can grow, but few places show that harsh truth as clearly as the Kubuqi Desert. Tucked deep within Inner Mongolia, the Kubuqi stretches across more than 7,000 square miles, roughly the size of Massachusetts. It's the seventh largest desert in China, but once it wasn't a desert at all. Generations ago, Kubuqi was alive, rolling grasslands, dotted with rivers and small farming villages. Families grew crops, herded animals, and watched the sun rise over green fields. But nature has moods. And when balance broke, everything changed. The winds grew stronger, hotter, sharper. Winters cut like knives, temperatures dropping to -4 degrees Fahrenheit, slicing through layers of cloth and skin. Summers scorched the soil until it cracked open like a broken mirror. Slowly, the grass stopped growing, the rivers vanished, the soil turned to dust, and then came the sand. At first, it crept in quietly, a patch here, a dune there. Then entire fields disappeared overnight. Sandstorms howled through villages like angry ghosts, burying homes, roads, and even rivers under mountains of dust. People woke up to find their doors sealed by dunes taller than their rooftops. In just a few decades, the Kubuqi expanded eastward by more than 25 miles, swallowing thousands of acres of farmland. Crops failed, cattle starved. One by one, families packed their belongings and left, leaving behind empty homes half buried in sand. To those who stayed, the landscape looked like the end of the world. Locals began calling it the Sea of Death. But this wasn't just a local tragedy, it was a warning. As Kubuqi spread, it sent massive dust storms sweeping across northern China, reaching as far as Beijing. The desert had become a living threat to cities hundreds of miles away. By the 1950s and 60s, the Chinese government could no longer ignore the crisis. Massive anti-desertification campaigns were launched, an early environmental effort on a scale the world had never seen. They planted windbreak forests to block the gales. They banned livestock grazing to protect fragile grass. They drilled deep wells, hoping to coax life from the dry earth. Billions were invested. Entire armies of workers and scientists joined the fight, but the desert didn't care. The sand kept advancing, swallowing everything in its path. The problem, they realized, wasn't just about trees or water. It was deeper, and nature wasn't going to yield so easily. For decades, Kubuqi remained an open wound in China's landscape. A haunting reminder of how quickly fertile land could die when the environment turns against you. Yet, somewhere amid that hopelessness, one man looked at the endless dunes and saw not a curse, but a challenge. Locals called him mad. History would call him something else entirely, the Desert King. The madman of Kubuqi, the Desert King. If the Kubuqi Desert had a sworn enemy, his name would be Wang Wenbiao, the man locals first called crazy before they started calling him king. But this story doesn't begin with power or privilege. It begins with a young schoolteacher from Inner Mongolia, poor, exhausted, and surrounded by sand. Every morning, a much younger Wang would wake before sunrise, hop on a battered bicycle, and pedal 6 miles through dunes just to reach his classroom. The wind was merciless. By the time he arrived, his face would be crusted with sand, and his lungs burned from dust. Sometimes the gusts were so strong that his bicycle half disappeared in the shifting dunes. That was life in Kubuqi. For most people, it was a nightmare. For Wang, it became a mission. He once looked around at the endless dunes and said something that sounded more like madness than hope. "If I can't escape the desert," he said, "I'll make it pay rent." By the late 1980s, Kubuqi had already buried villages and was threatening what little livelihood remained. The land was barren, the air dry, and opportunity non-existent. Then, in 1988, at the age of 28, Wang took over a struggling salt factory in the heart of the desert, a factory that couldn't even transport its own product because the roads kept getting swallowed by sand. Every route they built vanished within weeks. Trucks got stuck. Workers quit. The business was dying, and Wang realized something. The only way to save the factory was to save the desert itself. So he did something almost no one had ever attempted. He invested every yuan he had, and plenty he didn't, into fighting the sand. He bought stretches of barren land and began to plant, not just salt, but hope. Armed with little more than determination and curiosity, Wang began experimenting. He built windbreak fences to stop the dunes from crawling across the roads. He dug irrigation ditches and planted the hardiest desert shrubs he could find. Most of them died. The wind buried seedlings faster than they could grow. Machinery broke down. Workers complained that the project was cursed. Even local officials dismissed him as that delusional teacher with a shovel. But Wang wasn't delusional. He was observant. Living among the dunes, he began recording everything: the direction of the wind, the shifting of the sands, the patterns of rare rainfall. Slowly, he began to see the desert not as an enemy, but as a living system, one that could be studied, understood, and maybe even persuaded to change. Instead of forcing technology onto nature, he decided to work with it, to mimic the desert's own logic. Every dune, every gust of wind became part of his experiment. He learned where to plant certain trees, how to shape the land to trap water, and how to make nature itself do most of the heavy lifting. For years, people mocked him. Reporters ignored him. Some said he was wasting his life chasing mirages. But slowly, imperceptibly, something began to change. The sand didn't move as fast. A few seedlings survived the storms, then a few more. His salt factory, renamed Allian Resources Group, became the foundation of something far bigger, a mission to turn the Kubuqi Desert into a living laboratory for ecological rebirth. He began hiring locals, teaching them how to plant and protect the fragile vegetation. The desert that had once driven people away was now giving them work, and with it, a reason to stay. Step by step, Wang's mad dream started to look less like insanity and more like foresight. But just when people thought they'd seen the limits of his creativity, he made his wildest move yet. 1 million rabbits in the sea of sand. He brought rabbits into the desert. Yes, actual rabbits. Not drones, not robots, not machines with fancy sensors. Just soft, furry little rabbits hopping across one of the driest places on Earth. Locals thought he'd finally lost it. Some laughed. But Wang wasn't chasing headlines. He saw something others didn't: the hidden power of life itself. These weren't ordinary rabbits either. They were Rex rabbits, a breed from France often called the white gold of the fur world. Their fur is unbelievably soft and sells for up to $30 a pelt, even though raising one costs barely a fraction of that. On paper, it was good business. But for Wang, this was about more than profit. It was about creating an ecosystem that could sustain itself. See, the Kubuqi Desert didn't just need plants, it needed life, a spark to kickstart nature's engine again. And rabbits, it turns out, were perfect for the job. Their manure is pure treasure, packed with nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, the three nutrients the desert sand desperately lacked. Every pellet that hit the ground added a bit of life back into the earth. Over time, dry sand began darkening into rich, fertile humus, the first brown soil seen in those parts for decades. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Rex rabbits can't digest grass seeds, so every time they did their business, they were actually planting those seeds, wrapped in natural fertilizer. The next time it rained, which wasn't often, but still, those tiny seed-filled pellets sprouted into tufts of green. Life literally grew out of rabbit droppings. Of course, the rabbits couldn't just roam wild. Wang set up enclosed eco-farms, closed-loop systems where everything connected. The rabbits provided meat, fur, and medicine, yes, but more importantly, they kept producing the fertilizer that would transform miles of sand into farmland. Their waste fed the soil fed the plants and grasses, and the plants anchored the dunes so the sand couldn't reclaim it all again. It was bioengineering at its simplest, nature helping nature. And it worked. Before long, millions of Rex rabbits were thriving in the once lifeless desert, living proof that the land wasn't dead, just waiting for the right kind of push. The dunes began to stay still. Windbreaks held, green patches expanded, The same place that once swallowed roads and villages now shimmered with signs of life. For Wang, this wasn't magic, it was ecological logic. The rabbits were only one piece of a much larger plan in a complex system that would one day reshape the entire Kubuqi landscape. But it was this odd, almost laughable idea that proved something powerful, and just when everyone thought Wang had run out of surprises, he moved on to the next impossible step. Willow trees and the zero-waste eco-cycle. When Wang Wenbiao looked out at the endless dunes of Kubuqi, he knew the rabbits alone couldn't win this fight. They needed food, shelter, and protection. Something strong enough to hold the desert still. And that's when he thought of the willow tree. Now, don't underestimate willows. They might look gentle, with their drooping leaves and quiet grace, but these trees are absolute warriors. Their roots can reach over 300 feet deep. That's about the height of a 30-story building, all underground. Those roots stretch down into the dry earth, tapping into water that most plants can only dream of reaching. Once they find it, they hold on tight, binding the shifting sands together like natural glue. In a place where even the wind seems to kill, the willows stood tall. They didn't just survive, they thrived. Their roots stopped dunes from crawling over villages, their shade cooled the air, and their fallen leaves began to feed the soil that had long been nothing but dust. That's when Wang's great idea, his natural engineering, really started to take shape. He designed what scientists now call the zero-waste eco-cycle, but it's really just nature doing what it's always done best: balance itself. Nothing was wasted. Everything was connected. Each element, trees, animals, soil, even microbes, played its part in keeping the system alive. Scientists estimate that every acre of this willow rabbit model can produce over 5 tons of humus each year. Within just 3 to 5 years, what was once a barren wasteland began to resemble farmland, and it didn't stop there. Once locals saw what was happening, thousands of villagers joined the mission. What began as one man's mad experiment turned into a full-blown eco-economy. People were hired to plant willows, raise rabbits, and maintain irrigation lines. Families that once struggled to survive the sand now had stable jobs and green land stretching to the horizon. Innovations followed. Wastewater from nearby towns was recycled to feed the trees. Even the wind, the same force that used to destroy roads, was harnessed through turbines to power pumps and lights. The desert wasn't just being reclaimed, it was being reborn. What Wang and his team built was more than a project. It was a living system, proof that sustainability doesn't always come from technology. Sometimes it comes from listening to nature's own blueprint. The willows were more than trees. They were the backbone of an entire cycle where life fed life, endlessly. And as the years passed, something incredible began to happen. The beige dunes that once defined Kubuqi started fading under a wash of green. You could actually see the desert changing color. The desert that changed color. At first, the change was almost invisible, a few green dots scattered across a sea of gold. But to Wang Wenbiao, those dots were everything. They were proof that his dream was finally taking root. By now, the Kubuqi Desert had become more than a place. It was an experiment, a giant living laboratory where ecology and economy moved together under the harsh Mongolian sun. And Wang wasn't done. He called in over 100 bulldozers and a small army of workers, more than 300 people who toiled up to 18 hours a day. Their job? Flatten dunes, build windbreak fences, and shape the desert into something that could hold life. Every day, the roar of engines echoed through the sands, a strange sound in a place that had once known only silence and wind. The goal was simple, yet insane: turn chaos into order and dunes into soil. Then came the moment that changed everything. The first patches of green began to appear, not just on the ground, but from space. Satellite images showed small bursts of vegetation spreading like freckles across the yellow expanse. The desert, for the first time in centuries, was changing color. Within just 5 years, over 1,200 square miles of land, nearly the size of Rhode Island, had turned green. Once barren dunes now shimmered with life, ribbons of willows, clusters of grass, even patches of farmland. The transformation was so dramatic that local weather patterns started to shift. Windstorms became less frequent. The air felt heavier, moister. Even the temperature stabilized a little, as vegetation trapped humidity and cooled the scorching ground. And with the land's rebirth came a human one. Families that had fled years earlier began returning home. Villages long buried in sand re-emerged. Over 10,000 families found work raising Rex rabbits, growing willows, or maintaining irrigation lines. What had once been survival became sustainability, and even prosperity. Each family only needed a few $1,000s to start, and within a year, many earned 4 times that. The desert that once swallowed livelihoods was now feeding them. In the Dailad Banner area alone, the project supported millions of rabbits and generated nearly $76 million in local income. Wang's green empire was thriving, not through technology alone, but through balance. And soon the rest of the world noticed. Chinese officials began visiting Kubuqi to see what was being called a miracle of the desert. Scientists and environmentalists arrived from across the globe, trying to understand how a place that had been written off as lifeless was now setting the standard for sustainable development. Media outlets picked up the story, and then came the moment that truly put Kubuqi on the map. The Discovery Channel featured the project in a global documentary, calling it one of the most ambitious nature-based solutions in human history. Wang Wenbiao, once the poor teacher who biked through sandstorms, was now being called the Desert King. And just when it seemed the miracle had peaked, Wang decided to push it even further, this time by reaching beyond the Earth itself. Solar power and the energy revolution. Wang Wenbiao looked up and decided to harness the one thing the desert had too much of: sunlight. It sounds poetic now, but back then it was pure madness. The Kubuqi Desert, once called the Sea of Death, was about to become a sea of light. Right in the heart of those golden sands, Wang built something the world had never seen before: the Junma Solar Project. Junma means galloping horse in Chinese, and that's exactly what it looks like, using 196,000 solar panels. Engineers designed the farm in the sweeping shape of a running horse, a tribute to the spirit of progress charging across the desert. From space, it looks like a giant black stallion racing over the dunes. Half art, half energy revolution. It didn't just catch the world's eye, it caught the world's imagination. The Guinness World Records even named it the largest solar artwork on Earth. But this wasn't about beauty alone. Those panels were built with purpose. The Junma plant generates an incredible 2.3 billion kilowatt-hours of clean electricity every year, enough to power over 400,000 homes. That's right, in the middle of a place once famous for killing life, Wang was now generating it. And here's where it gets clever. The solar panels don't just soak up sunlight, they also give shade. That shade slows evaporation, letting grass and shrubs grow beneath the panels. Beneath this shimmering canopy, rabbits and sheep graze, geese are released to mow the grass naturally, and their droppings return nutrients to the soil. The panels cut wind speeds by up to 50%, which means no more runaway sandstorms, just stability, growth, and quiet life returning. It's called agro-PV, agriculture combined with solar energy, and in Kubuqi, it works like a charm. Every ray of light does double duty, generating energy above and nurturing life below. By 2022, the Junma Solar Project had saved 760,000 tons of coal and cut 1.85 million tons of carbon dioxide, which is the same as planting over 80 million trees. Just think about that. One man's crazy idea turned a desert into one of the world's cleanest power plants. The results were almost too good to believe. In just 4 years, the area around Junma transformed more than 2,600 acres of barren wasteland into a green energy oasis. From above, the sand now shimmered with silver and green instead of lifeless gold. And Wang's brilliance didn't stop at the panels. He created what economists now call a closed value chain, a cycle where nothing goes to waste. Meat, fur, manure, biogas, tourism, and solar energy all flowed in a seamless loop that kept both people and the planet thriving. Between 2010 and 2020 alone, Kubuqi's eco-economy generated over $10 billion, making it one of the most profitable green models in all of Asia. What started as a battle for survival had become a blueprint for the future, and as the panels shimmered in the sun, something even more miraculous began to happen. Nature's comeback. For decades, the people of Kubuqi fought the desert, and one day, the desert finally surrendered. Slowly, quietly, nature began to breathe again. It was breathtaking. According to a 2023 report from China's Ministry of Ecology, wildlife populations in Kubuqi have quadrupled since 1990. Imagine that, deer grazing where dunes once towered, foxes darting between shrubs, and flocks of migratory birds painting the sky above what used to be an endless wasteland. The silence of sand had given way to the hum of life. And it wasn't just the animals. Over 100 native plant species made their grand return. Resilient ones like feathergrass, hardy desert poplars, and even bursts of wildflowers that now color the landscape in pinks, yellows, and whites. What was once monochrome gold had turned into a living canvas of green and bloom. From space, Kubuqi no longer looked like a scar on the Earth. It looked like it was healing. But the most astonishing comeback didn't come from above the ground. It came from beneath. The groundwater, the hidden lifeblood of the desert, started to rise. Over the last 20 years, water levels have climbed between 5 and 6.5 feet. That may not sound like much, but in the world of desert restoration, it's nothing short of miraculous. For the first time in generations, locals could dig a well and strike water at half the depth their grandparents once did. That's the line between survival and extinction, between dust and growth. The air feels different now. The soil no longer flies away with every gust of wind. It stays put, moist, rich, and dark with organic life. Farmers say it even smells alive, that sweet, earthy scent that only exists where life has taken root. And with the land came the people, homes, schools, and small farms. Ecotourism is booming. Travelers from around the world now visit Kubuqi not to see what was lost, but to witness what was reborn. You'll find cafes serving local tea under willow shade, tourists snapping photos beside solar fields, and children chasing rabbits across green dunes that their grandparents only remembered as barren sand. The Kubuqi miracle has become more than an environmental victory. It's a global symbol of what happens when technology and nature work together instead of against each other. Solar power, biology, and community effort, three unlikely partners, turned a wasteland into a thriving ecosystem. And yet, there's a twist to this story, because while one desert was saved with the help of an animal, another desert halfway across the world was destroyed by the very same creature. Comparison with Australia. When you think of rabbits, you probably imagine something cute, harmless, maybe nibbling on a carrot in a cartoon. But in 19th century Australia, those fluffy creatures nearly broke an entire continent. It all started on Christmas Eve, 1859, when a British settler named Thomas Austin decided to make his new home in Australia feel a bit more like England. So he released 24 European rabbits into the wild, just for sport hunting. 24, that's it. What could possibly go wrong? Well, everything. Those 24 rabbits multiplied faster than anyone could have imagined. Within 50 years, Australia was crawling with an estimated 1 billion rabbits. Yes, 1 billion. That's more rabbits than there were humans on the entire planet at the time of the Roman Empire. Each rabbit could eat as much grass as a lamb, and together they devoured everything. Grass, shrubs, even roots. Vegetation vanished, soil dried out, and within decades, nearly 2/3 of Australia's fertile plains had turned to dust. By the early 1900s, Australia was facing one of the greatest ecological disasters in human history. The government scrambled to stop the invasion. They built massive fences over 2,000 miles long, almost the width of the United States. Farmers tried poison, traps, rifles, even explosives. Nothing worked. Then came biological warfare. Scientists released the myxomatosis virus in the 1950s, killing millions of rabbits. It worked, for a while, but nature fought back. The survivors evolved immunity, and soon the population exploded again. Australia had accidentally created the perfect rabbit apocalypse. So why did rabbits destroy Australia, but help save China's Kubuqi Desert? The answer lies in one word: control. In Australia, the rabbits were free, wild, and unchecked, a biological wildfire. But in China, the story was completely different. When Wang Wenbai brought rabbits to Kubuqi, he didn't unleash them into the wild. He built a closed-loop system, a self-sustaining cycle where every element served a purpose. The Rex rabbits were raised in farms, not fields. They ate specially grown willows that anchored the sand. Their manure enriched the soil, which grew more plants, which fed more rabbits, creating both ecological and economic balance. Nothing was left to chaos. That's the crucial lesson. Balance matters. Nature-based solutions work only when they're guided, measured, and kept in harmony. Leave nature unmanaged, and it can spiral into disaster. But nurture it, and even a desert can bloom. Interestingly, recent genetic studies have confirmed that Thomas Austin's rabbits were not just any rabbits. They were wild ones, captured from the English countryside. Their hardy genes, their camouflage coloring, and their instinctive fear response helped them adapt perfectly to Australia's harsh climate. Researchers published their findings in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, revealing that almost all of Australia's modern wild rabbits can be traced back to those 24 individuals. The irony is almost poetic. The same species that once devoured an entire ecosystem in one hemisphere would later help restore another on the opposite side of the world. But that's how nature works. It's not good or evil, just powerful. and it's up to humans to decide which side of that power they stand on. In Kubuqi, the rabbits are part of a living equation, carefully measured, scientifically managed, economically beneficial. They help generate biogas, meat, fur, manure, and even tourism income, all while sustaining the desert's green transformation. But behind the headlines, awards, and beautiful satellite images of Kubuqi's rebirth, not everyone sees perfection. Controversies and hidden sides. Every miracle comes with a shadow, and Kubuqi's green revolution is no exception. For years, the world has celebrated it as proof that humans can heal the planet. But behind the glossy drone footage and satellite snapshots, not everyone is convinced that the desert's transformation is as simple or as pure as it seems. Some environmentalists have started to ask uncomfortable questions. Did millions of rabbits really turn a desert green, or was that just the catchy headline? Critics argue that the rabbit model played only a small part in a much larger, more complex system run by the ENN Group, the energy and environmental conglomerate founded by Wang Wenbai. They say Chinese media exaggerated the story's romantic side, the idea of bunnies saving a desert, while the real engines of success were government planning, corporate investment, and advanced land restoration technologies. In their eyes, Kubuqi's miracle wasn't born from biology alone, but from billion-yuan budgets, satellite-guided irrigation, and state-backed innovation. And then there's the environmental side of the debate, the green paradox, as some call it. While the rabbit's manure was once hailed as organic gold, experts have warned that too much of a good thing can quickly become a problem. If the waste piles up faster than it decomposes, it risks causing nitrogen pollution, which can alter soil chemistry and leak into groundwater. In some areas, researchers even noticed algae blooms forming around fertilizer ponds, small but worrying signs that balance might be tipping again. Then there's the question of scale. What happens if this model keeps expanding without limits? Can an ecosystem built on precision and control remain sustainable once it grows beyond its natural carrying capacity? Even the most well-designed cycles can break if pushed too far, and no one wants to see the green desert become a cautionary tale. Still, for all the doubts and debates, it's hard to deny what has been achieved. In 2011, the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification officially recognized Kubuqi as a global model for combating desertification, an honor shared by only a handful of places on Earth. And in 2019, it was declared an international demonstration center for land restoration, turning this once-forgotten desert into a classroom for the world. Critics may debate the details. Was it nature, science, corporate power? But no one can deny the outcome. Sand turned to soil, wind turned to energy, and hopelessness turned to opportunity. Wang Wenbai himself once said, "The desert doesn't care who takes the credit. It only responds to effort." And perhaps that's the truth of Kubuqi. Not a flawless miracle, but a living experiment that's still evolving, reminding us that progress is never one-sided. A global vision, the legacy of China reclaiming desert. The story of Kubuqi doesn't end in China. In fact, it's only just beginning. What started as one man's dream of turning sand into soil has now become a global blueprint, a living guidebook for nations fighting their own losing battles against the creeping desert. From Africa's Sahel to the Middle East, and now even to the heart of Europe, the Kubuqi model has begun to spread like a quiet green revolution. Spain, a region that once shimmered with wheat fields and olive groves under the Mediterranean sun. The Romans called it the granary of the empire. Today, though, it tells a far different story. Rainfall has plunged by more than 40% in just 3 decades. Hundreds of rivers and ancient Moorish irrigation channels have run dry. Cracks split through farmlands that once fed millions, and wells now dig over 50 feet deep just to find a trace of groundwater. The European Union estimates that 3/4 of Spain's land is now directly threatened by desertification. You read that right. Europe's sunniest paradise is becoming its fastest-growing desert. But here's where the story shifts from tragedy to transformation. Instead of surrendering to the sands, Spain decided to learn from China's success. Inspired by the Kubuqi model, the government launched the Andalusia Restoration Plan 2030, a daring, hopeful project built on a simple but profound idea. Don't fight the desert, revive it. They're calling it the Mediterranean Green Wall. Across southern Spain, millions of olive trees, acacias, and native grasses are being planted to anchor the soil and restore the natural moisture cycle. Instead of chemical-heavy farming, the region is adopting regenerative agriculture, treating soil, crops, and climate as one living system, rather than separate problems. Farmers are learning to see the land not as an enemy to be controlled, but as a partner to be understood. And that's not all. Solar farms, those sleek, gleaming mirrors of progress, are now dotting the Andalusian landscape. But these aren't your standard power plants. They're agro-PV systems, directly modeled after Kubuqi's innovation. And it's working. In just a few short years, once barren hillsides are showing hints of green again. The olive groves are returning, bees are buzzing back to the fields, and local communities are finding fresh hope and jobs in sustainable farming and renewable energy. From Kubuqi to Cordoba, Inner Mongolia to the Mediterranean, the same philosophy echoes. Healing the earth isn't about conquering nature, it's about partnering with it. That's the global lesson Wang Wenbai's experiment left behind. The madman of the desert taught the world that ecology and economy aren't enemies, and that even the most hopeless wastelands can bloom again when human ingenuity meets patience and respect for natural systems. Can Wang's system really save the deserts around the world? What's your take on this? Share your perspective in the comments section.